Surgery. Not too impressed, to say the least. The doctor did try to warn me, ahead of time, about the excessive amount of breast tissue he had to remove, but I failed to heed his warning. I looked, and still look, like I've been in a sword fight and lost. No matter, at least I can wear any kind of shirt I want and have the outside appearance of a manly chest. I'm not parading out without my shirt anyway, so what's done is done. Problem solved. Chapter 9, Food Allergies continued the year, 2010. Fortunately, as time had gone by, my lip, ankle, and forehead swelling days had ended. I haven't had a problem with that for years. I guess the steady consumption of the protein digestive aid resulted in my body finally producing the necessary enzymes for digestion. All in all, I had been able to eat most anything without any kind of repercussions. Unfortunately, all that was about to drastically change. I was in one of my weight loss phases, getting older, putting on a few pounds, breathing heavy, and aches and pains all played a part in me starting a regimen of diet and exercise. I was way too heavy for my frame with my blood pressure constantly in an elevated state. I decided it was time for a major change. I was still dealing with folliculitis as well, so I thought this might even help that. Afterwards, no significant change however. I went on a salad-only diet and started jogging. Where we lived, at the time, was an exceptionally peaceful, wooded area. Behind the house was a cleared dirt road, in the woods, that ran approximately 2 miles around the property. I jogged a slow steady pace and as the days went by, I managed to finally complete a round trip of the 2-mile course daily. I was losing weight, feeling pretty good about myself, and able to fit into those smaller blue jeans that had been hanging in the closet a few years. I did notice, but didn't mind, each time I came out of the woods from running and took a shower, I would find all kinds of bugs and creatures in and on my skin and clothing. I was raised, as a little boy, roaming the woods so these things didn't bother me at all. At this time, I had probably been jogging for about 6 months. I had started in the early summer. And it was now December. A family Christmas party was scheduled for tonight at the American Legion where I'm a musician. I had gone up to the Legion to prepare the big hall we were to use. Prior to our party, the local WAC, Women's Army Corps, unit had their party. I had to wait a little while for them to finish cleaning up before I could do our setup. Once they were through, I went back to the hall. No sooner than I got back there, my stomach began aching violently. I felt dizzy and almost faint. I really struggled to sit down and try to recoup. I knew, right then, I was in trouble. One of the WACs, who was still in the back, noticed my ghost white appearance and went and got Sheila, my girlfriend. She immediately got me a cold rag. She thought maybe I was having a heart attack. I told her that I was going to have to leave, but I'd be back. It was all I could do not to pass out and slash or throw up. Whew. Everything was spinning around, but all I knew was I had to go. A good thing was that we only lived about 4 miles from the Legion, so I was able to get home in a rather short amount of time. I immediately was forced to the bathroom, whereby it seemed that my innards were being ripped from my body. What seemed like an eternity and a reduction of pounds of body weight later, I set out to try and make it to the living room. No such luck. The moment I got up and started walking, I was so dizzy and faint that I knew I was going down. I laid on the bedroom carpet, barely conscious, and struggling to breathe. I thought as long as I didn't move, I'd be all right. Then, I just passed out. When I came to, 2 hours had passed. I managed to get up and practically ran and fell on the living room couch. The bedroom I was in didn't have a bed. We were using it as a room for our animals, a small cat, Miss Kitty, and a rat terrier dog, MS. T. This was the room we kept a towel for Puppy, MS. T's nickname, and the litter box for Kitty, Miss Kitty's nickname. Matter of fact, when I went down, my head was practically on top of Puppy's towel, but at the time, it didn't matter to me at all. I laid on the couch, going in and out of awareness, till about 30 minutes before time for our Christmas party. I knew, as the party was dependent on my opening and closing the building, that I had to get up and go. The initial attack began about 12 p.m. and it was now 5:30 p.m. with the party set to begin at 6 p.m. Somehow, in a stupor, I survived the night with not a single relative the wiser. Never had I encountered anything like that before, and I hoped that I never would again. Wrong. It would get much worse. Not knowing what to blame for the allergic reaction left me dumbfounded. Sheila and I tried to evaluate anything unusual that I might have eaten, drank, or come in contact with. Nothing seemed to fit the normal things from my early years' reactions. Matter of fact, the only thing I drank that day was coffee and perhaps a Coke. Nothing to eat at all. Sheila was, and is, very smart when it comes to these kinds of things. She happened upon the only thing that could have possibly caused such an extreme reaction. One of the whacks had sprayed Febreze prior to me going to the back room. This was the only thing that was different from the norm. Don't know why or how I suddenly became allergic to the popular spray, but it seems I did. How I know, now, for a fact I'm allergic to it, is that I've been exposed again accidentally and immediately started itching, developing welts, and having extreme breathing difficulties. I began carrying Benadryl to combat the histamine produced by my reaction. This seemed to work fairly well if I were to breathe it, Febreze, in. Okay, so now I had a new culprit to deal with. What next? Well, shortly after that attack, I periodically started having bouts of allergic reactions almost weekly. They always start the same. Itching under my arms and around my waist, and huge welts, hives, immediately developing around my belt line, on my chest, and down my legs. My breathing becomes extremely labored with me taking short gasps, almost like I'm hyperventilating. The Benadryl still helps, but not to the extent of stopping the reaction completely. Finally, on one of my severe AR occasions, Sheila figured out what was causing it. Not why, but what. Here's the story. Sheila was in the hospital for a surgical procedure. It was going to be necessary for her to spend the night, and I was going to stay with her. She had settled down, asleep, and I was resting on the couch, bed thingy that was in the room. All of a sudden, around 2 a.m., I started itching insatiably under my arms. This rapidly started moving to my belt line. Oh, no. I knew I was in trouble once again. It had been a while since I had an AR attack, and I didn't have any Benadryl with me. I thought if I could make it to my car, I'd go find an all-night store. Thing was, I was going into a full-blown attack, and I knew I couldn't possibly make it. Needless to say, the commotion I was making woke up Sheila. I tried to tell her what was going on and what I was going to try to do. She immediately buzzed for her nurse and tried to console me. By this time, I was panting, scratching like a wild man, and basically just a mess. The nurse came in, thinking something drastic was wrong with Sheila, and saw this madman flailing about. Finally, Sheila, who still was suffering from the effects of her surgery, was able to tell the nurse about my allergic reactions. The nurse went out and brought back a wheelchair. She explained that she was going to take me down to the ER. The trip down to the ER was a nightmare. I could hardly sit still. I was itching from my head to my toes, breathing in short gasps, and now, nauseated. I had her stop several times just to keep from throwing up all over the place. In what seemed like an eternity, we finally arrived. Keep in mind, I was really a mess. As usual, I had a big beard, long hair, and looked like a hobo. My favorite attire was and is a worn, out flannel striped shirt, ragged blue jeans, and tennis shoes that should have been given to Goodwill years ago. Top that off with I had been asleep, so everything about me was either wrinkled or disheveled. Here I am, finally in the care of medical professionals, and I'm trying to tell them my situation. All of a sudden, someone bursts into the room and asked, "Where did you find him?" Delirious, I still couldn't help but start laughing. It was like, did they find me out by the dumpster diving for scraps or something? It was just so hysterically funny, even though I just knew I was going to drop dead at any moment. Embarrassingly, the nurse who wheeled me down, explained that I was staying with a patient overnight, and had been asleep when the attack happened. Believe it or not, everyone in the room couldn't help but laugh. Me more so than anyone. Okay, back to business. They removed my shirt and saw all the welts that had developed. My face, chest, and arms had also turned a blotched red color and hot to the touch. Even with all this going on, an obvious allergic reaction to something, I was put in a room for 45 minutes without anything to counter the reaction. They were required to do a drug test prior to administering any kind of medication. I kept telling them to just give me some Benadryl, but no dice. Nothing. Nada. By the time the 45 minutes passed, I resembled someone from a leper colony, with a demeanor to match. I really wasn't a happy camper, but tried not to take it out on the nurses. Finally, they gave me an intravenous injection of prescription-strength Benadryl and the AR symptoms started to dissipate. I had scratched so much and so hard, that I had claw marks up and down my arms and chest. They actually treated them with antiseptic cream, and at one point, put some small bandages on my arms. Whew! What a ride! After being in the ER for a few hours, they released me. The original nurse who had brought me down, offered to wheel me back to Sheila's room, but I refused. I was going to walk, no matter what. She followed me back anyway. Guess she was feeling a little guilty about the remarks and the length of my suffering. After such an ordeal, and as good a story as this gave me to tell, I wouldn't wish it upon anyone. Somehow, I had to figure out what was going on. Once again, Sheila was the brains behind that. Once out of the hospital, Sheila and I began trying to determine a common denominator that could have caused my AR attack. At this point, I had had at least 3 or 4 major reactions such as the ER debacle, and each time, it was around 2 to 3 a.m. when it would start. Our first thought, to that incident, was that they had sprayed Febreze in the hospital room. Upon later questioning the staff, they assured us that that wasn't the case. No chemical deodorizers are used, at all, in a hospital environment, simply because of people like me. That eliminated that. Next came what did we eat? One of Sheila's favorite food items are Crystal hamburgers. I had gone out, after her surgery, and bought a whole bag of the burgers. I'm famously known for being able to consume at least 6 to 8 of these little morsels, no problem, which I did that very night. Sheila, unbeknownst to me, had been logging what I had eaten prior to each time I had a major AR attack. In the log, the common ingredient of each meal was some sort of beef or pork. Chicken and turkey meals never produced an attack. She surmised that the most logical culprit had to be those forms of meat. Even though Crystal burgers are a far cry from real meat, they do contain enough of the properties to qualify as such. Say it ain't so. How in the world could anybody be allergic to meat? Armed with this particular scenario, I went on. My usual internet search. What I found was both alarming and yet exciting. Seems that there is a direct correlation between being bitten by a particular type of tick, the Lone Star tick, and my AR attacks. As I had stated previously, I had been running in the woods behind my house and on numerous occasions had removed ticks from my skin. Bingo! There it was. I believe, in a court of law, this Lone Star tick would have qualified as guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It was now clear to us that I would be forced to eliminate all pork and beef from my diet. That didn't seem like it would be too hard for me. I'm a bread and potato kind of guy anyway and doubted that I'd miss beef and pork. I have not eaten pork or beef, intentionally, since. Those times that I have accidentally eaten either, I would immediately start feeling the results and would be forced to use an EpiPen for relief. Because of the severity of my attacks, and prior to the Lone Star tick discovery, I had gone to my regular physician and had been prescribed an EpiPen. He could not offer any reasonable solution for the problem, but at least gave me a recourse for perhaps saving my life. I have been forced to use a pen at least 3 times in the past so far. Supposedly, the symptoms of the Lone Star tick bite usually only last from 6 months to 5 years max. Occasionally, some reports have stated that it could be an indefinite period. Of course, and as usual, I fall into the indefinite category. It's been 8 years now, since the discovery of the AR attacks, and I'm still subject to them. Now and then, I do miss a Wendy's fat burger or a barbecue pork rib, but tempted as I might be, ain't no way I'd eat either. A thought for the government, new torture technique. Give your terrorist a huge beef steak. Round up a bunch of the Lone Star ticks and have bite your terrorist. Wait a little while, and he or she will tell you anything you want to know for a shot of epinephrine, don't you know? Problem figured out and potentially solved. Chapter 10, Folliculitis Finale Year, 2018. I have, as mentioned before, been suffering for over 30 years with this folliculitis nonsense. Several times, I've had to resort to taking some leftover antibiotics that Sheila had, no matter what kind